Affinity can still do a lot with 4 cards, but you don't have to be too terrified. Given that Matt is not packing main deck removal spells, this could be a game that he could win on 4 cards. We'll see exactly how good they are.
All right, so turn 1, we have Springleaf Drum, Ornithopter, and Signal Pest. Those are the 4 cards.
These are fine. He's going to need a bigger payoff than that. Cranial Plating off the top would be really nice.
Steel Overseer off the top could be great. There are some payoffs that can win here.
Yeah, the current situation only attacks for 1.
And now Voltz will turn 1 suspend Search for tomorrow. The red-green Breach deck is oftentimes, it's very consistent as a turn 4 deck. And you see Matt with multiple copies of Simian Spirit Guide might even be able to go faster. For Mann, the draw was Mox Opal. He'll activate the Nexus, swing with all 3 creatures. That's good for actually 3 damage. Matt will drop to 15.
It also makes it so if he draws Cranial Plating, he'll be able to play and equip on the following turn.
Yeah, he does have 3 mana available.
He needs to get going, though. Search for Tomorrow, suspended on turn 1, is really the high side of what the red-green Breach can start on.
Oh, yeah.
Following up with the Ram Spell on turn 2 and Farseek here, this deck is firing on all cylinders, assuming that there are payoff cards already available.
Yeah, I mean, it does have some turn 3 kills, and right now, Matt is actually on pace for it. If he manages to untap, make a mountain here, play a mountain from hand, or just actually any land from hand, breach in a Titan, get 2 Valakuts, attack with Titan, get mountains 5 and 6, that can be lethal. Because Affinity stays at 20, that would actually not be enough damage. Instead, he'd have to just settle for killing all Stephen Mann's creatures and dealing him 12. It probably still be good enough.
Right. It looks like no action for Mann.
No, a swing again for 3 puts Voltz down to 12. Steve drew a card there, did not play it.
And with the pace that Steve is clocking Matthew currently, he's not going to need anything like a Through the Breach.
Right. A lot of times in this matchup, which is game 1, a racing matchup, the red-green Breach deck needs to do one of 2 things. They either need the card Through the Breach to be a faster deck, or they need Anger of the Gods to allow them to be the slower deck. Matt's deck didn't have Anger. He may not have Breach here, but the mulligan to 4 means he may not need it. Summoner's Pact for Matt Voltz. Getting Primeval Titan. All right, here's some business.
Certainly cause for alarm when your opponent has access to 4 mana and searches for a 6 mana creature.
Steve just patiently cuts the deck here. That one makes sense. It's probably gonna search it again this turn. See Valakut in Matt's hand. With 2 Simian Spirit Guides, he could make Valakut and Primeval Titan. Getting 2 mountains, he could kill both Mann's creatures. We'll go a different route. Here's Primeval Titan. Remember,
2 Simian Spirit Guides.
Yeah, 2 Spirit Guides. He has not made the land drop yet. And I actually like this for Matt. By sequencing it this way, if he has the mountain in hand, it lets him get a Valakut first, which is going to be nicer. You want to get as many Valakuts as possible out of your deck. And he's actually really laying this one up. Gets 2 copies of Valakut.
Likely he'll be playing the 3rd from his hand here on this turn as well.
Yeah, so 3rd from hand says go. This is a challenge of win the game right now, or this Titan's going to attack for just 18 damage on triggers alone.
Yeah, Matthew just needs to remember to pay for his Summoner's Pact. That's going to be the big hurdle in this game.
I have this gigantic die I keep in my dice bag that I use just for this because I don't trust myself. Though for someone like Matt, maybe he won't need it. A swing of 3 more damage puts Voltz down to 9.
Don't draw
There
a
you
card.
go.
All right.
There we go. Paid for the pact. Found it.
Wisely.
And Steve concedes to the tap of 4 mana.
Wisely pays for his pact.
Game 1 goes to Primeval Titan and Matthew Voltz.
Unfortunate mulligans for Steve Mann. Things get a lot worse as we head to the sideboards.
And you look at the difference on Steve was really 1 payoff card from that being a very winnable game. You mentioned 1 cranial plating could have done it.
Right.
So we're gonna look at the sideboards. We'll start with Steve Mann. His is going to be tougher here. He's got Ancient Grudge, Girapur, Aether Grid, Etch Champion, Thoughtseize, Rest in Peace, Spell Pierce, Wear Tear, Grafdigger's Cage, and Dispatch.
Now, Affinity is a deck that generally sideboards at most 5 cards. You really don't want to break up your main deck synergies, and luckily for Steven, he's only really got 3 cards that matter here. He has 2 Thoughtseize and a Spell Pierce. Definitely the Thoughtseize coming in, and you probably want the Spell Pierce as well. You know, the red-green Breach deck is very heavy on spells. Catching a Farseek in the early game or Anger of the Gods, that would be a really good one to stop from coming down.
Yeah, I like the Spell Pierce, maybe the Thoughtseize. I mean, in this matchup, I'm even worried that 3 cards might be overboarding. He wants to go fast.
Yes.
Now, on Matt Voltz's side, his sideboard has a ton of things to like.
Oh yeah, if we go down the list, we have 3 Chalice of the Void, 3 Anger of the Gods, 3 Lightning Bolts, 2 Ancient Grudge, 2 Tireless Tracker, a Crumbled Dust, and a Nature's Claim. In fact, most of this plays here. The Anger of the Gods are excellent.
Great.
The Lightning Bolts are excellent.
Great.
The Ancient Grudge is one of the better
That's why
cards.
it's in your sideboard.
Right. Yeah, this is a matchup that's for. You know, Tracker Crumbles aren't going to play here. Nature's Claim will.
Great.
That's another removal spell. I think Chalice of the Void is asking too much from that card. It's a little slow for this matchup. I would just stick to these removal spells.
Yeah, and when you look, the one thing about, mentioned that customizable package in Red Green Breach, you mentioned, will he mess up his ramp deck by boarding in 9 cards? And the answer is no. He can board out Courser of Crufix, Relic of Progenitus, Chandra Torch of Defiance. Even a copy of Simeon Spirit Guide's probably okay here. That's 9 cards already.
Right. And with just the volume of removal spells here, he should have a lot of time to find what he needs in the sideboarded games anyway.
All right. So for Steve Mann, we mentioned him, the Florida player here. 33-year-old from Tampa, Florida, has 8 open top 8s along with an open win. Has top 8 in an invitational as well. Both him and Logan Mize teaming up to qualify for our first Players Championship. We haven't seen him, though, much in the last couple of years.
Self-proclaimed GoldenEye 64 prodigy. I don't think that's a terribly applicable skill in the year 2017. He could be a speedrunner, but I think he would use the title speedrunner if that was the case.
There's, you know, and that was like the first shooter I'd played, and yeah, it was really neat. It was like the first multiplayer shooter that you could do on a console. I liked that part.
Oh yeah, I played a lot of
GoldenEye, and I'll say the hours I allowed in GoldenEye has not made me any good at modern day shooters.
Oh, they're very different.
Right. You know, I'll try to play like Halo, and I'm horrible.
I started being okay at Halo 3, and I was always pretty good at Counter-Strike, but I don't play any of the new ones.
Yeah, but it's like, you can aim? What's that? Like, you can aim up and down in Halo?
Yeah, GoldenEye was all about running around in circles around the person you were shooting.
Right, yeah. Because the controls were clunky enough that if I just sidestep while shooting, you probably can't hit me.
You walked sideways more than you walked forward.
That's basically how actual firefights work, too.
I assume.
If you just run back and forth, side to side, people generally miss you.
That's what they do in the movies.
Or if you crouch down, that was a good strategy in GoldenEye. If you crouched, because you could slide on your knees while crouched, and then you were really hard to hit.
I actually played as Jaws, the tallest character in the game. People use the strategy of playing as Oddjob, the shortest character, but I had no fear.
So over StarCityGames.com, we have our weekly sale running at the Star City store. That's a different deal every week. This last week, we've had 15% off select Modern cards. That sale is still running all weekend, so head on over to check out new cards for your Modern deck, and tune in on Monday morning at 11 when we have next week's weekly sale.
You too could harness the power of Affinity at a discount.
So I want to harness the power of Affinity. Steve has 7 cards this time. See what you can do with it. Mox Opal, Memnite, Ornithopter. Just not going to pay mana for anything. Arcbound Ravager, and a go.
This is what I would call an above average turn 1. I
like to count Affinity turns as far as number of cards that they played. And for me, like 4 is average, and more than 4 is good, and less than 4 is bad. So Steve passes the test here of good hand.
Your test generally is good. I mean, it's not 100%.
It's a course. You're right. It's not a very sensitive measuring tool. I said, yeah, how many cards did you play? 5? Ooh, probably can't beat a 5.
Now, if 4 of them are Ornithopter, more likely to be able to beat that.
You see another Ornithopter drawn from Mann. His rest of his hand, though, is another Inkmoth Nexus, a Darksteel Citadel, and an Ornithopter. So there's no speed to this hand. There's no payoff yet.
The payoff is the Ravager, which does matter a lot more in these sideboarded games when Matthew's drawing to his removal spells, his lightning bolts, well, it's not going to be good enough against Ancient Grudge just yet.
Right.
But this is enough stuff to beat Anger of the Gods.
We see, looks like Steve's going to play out most of the rest of his hand here.
Second Inkmoth Nexus and a second Ornithopter.
Now you do have to watch out if you're Matt Voltz. Steve's going to present a board where Anger may not be castable. There's the potential that Steve could throw all these counters onto an Inkmoth Nexus, and Matt's got to be very careful about that.
Mm-hmm. Even on his face, Steve can just sacrifice the 2 Ornithopters and the Memnite to the Ravager and just survive the Anger in the first place. Then he has the option to commit on the Inkmoth Nexus on a later turn. Anger is really not going to be enough against this draw. He's going to need that and some other interaction.
You see a sacks 1 Ornithopter just for extra damage.
Yeah, that extra Ornithopter wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, there's no Steel Overseer in his or something.
Overseer. His payoff is Ravager. He doesn't have Cranial Plating. He doesn't have Master of Ethereum. His last card in hand is Darksteel Citadel. So the cards that aren't doing any damage, it frequently makes sense to sacrifice them early to Ravager, get them that chip shot.
Yeah.
And in the face of interaction, he's going to have to sacrifice things to Ravager anyway.
Right, so he goes and makes that play right now. So it's 4 damage and 1 poison from Steve Mann.
An option that Steve had available was to sacrifice the Memnite as well, sack the Ravager to itself, and get in for 5 Infect with the Inkmoth Nexus. The risk on this is immensely high. Matthew could already have Lightning Bolt. He could draw Ancient Grudge. So it makes a lot of sense to just chip in for this much. Though if Matthew's hand is kind of non-functional, you do technically lose some value to the top of the deck, but the conservative line makes a lot of sense. It's just way too high risk to go that all in.
Yeah, and by playing the game this way, Steve has defended against Anger of the Gods. Mm-hmm. From Voltz, we're going to see Sakura Tri-Belter. Not bad here, but keep an eye on that poison counter next to Voltz. Mann has another land here. He can get 2 more poison in, and then you're going to have to start watching out for that one-shot play.
Well, hold on. This might be lethal this turn already. He has Darksteel Citadel, so he can activate both. He has access to 3 counters on the Ravager. The Memnites there as well. I guess he can't activate both Nexus and cast another artifact if he drew it.
So it's 2 poison from the creature lands. That would be, and then if he sacrifices artifacts, he could sacrifice his land drop, the Memnite, and the Mox Opal. Ravager would be a 6/6. Only gets 6 counters on. He's 1 short.
Right. Yeah, he only gets up to 9 total poison. If he had a 0-mana artifact on top of that, he could do it. Ooh, extra Ravager. He has the mana to activate 1 Inkmoth. This might be enough.
Extra Ravager here. Well, no, I think he's still down 1 because that Inkmoth Nexus as a land is not an artifact if it's not activated, and he's short on mana. So his Ravager could become a 5/5, a 6/6, a 7/7. He could activate the Inkmoth and make it and move 7 counters on it, putting Matt down to, it's once again only puts him to 9. So he'll swing in here. Sakura Tri-Builder jump in front of the Arcbound Ravager. 1 damage, 1 poison onto Matt. But this is still a great spot.
Yeah, he's 1 short, but still very far ahead on the board. Still cleanly ahead of Anger of the Gods.
Yeah, now actually, Ancient Grudge is a problem here.
Yes.
Because Matt could hit both Ravagers, and because Mann has no mana, he couldn't actually find a way to get those counters onto an Inkmoth Nexus. He'd have to put them onto Memnite.
Yeah, so Mann really needed to find some 0-mana artifact to make it lethal on this turn. So now as things get a little bit scary, we're beyond just Anger of the Gods. Matthew could have something like multiple removal spells.
Now keep in mind, damage hasn't happened yet. Mann's got to decide. He could put Matt Voltz to 2 poison, 14 life, or he could scoop his whole board up and put him at 9 poison. His whole board except for the 2 Ink Moth. It would be his whole board, though. Looks like some plays we made. Sacrifice to Ravager, sacrifice to Ravager. This is to the one that's not attacking. Put that Ravager onto the first one. And modular onto the Ink Moth. So it's going to be a 4/4 Arcbound Ravager attacking and a 4/4 Ink Moth Nexus.
And this line accomplishes 2 things. You were talking about how he doesn't have access to mana currently to move something onto the Ink Moth if something happened on Matthew's
it's a
turn.
good hedge play.
So he shores up having that large Ink Moth Nexus, and also the Ravager on the battlefield can survive anger as it is.
No, he's putting everything onto the Nexus. Hold on. He is not splitting the difference. He's moving all those counters onto the Ink Moth. Is that lethal? Are we off by 1 here? Perhaps Steve just did have lethal. Looks like we in the booth here, we counted off by 1. Well, I like this play a lot more. This is why I don't play this deck. Because this play looks very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a turn 3 kill here from Steve.
That's pretty good. That's a good start.
Wow. Well, all right then, Steve Mann, the turn 3 kill here. And look, that's through a Sakura Tri-Builder as a blocker.
That one can't block flyers.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Red-Green Breach player, you kind of have to just shrug a bit when that one happens. Your deck's not built in a way where you can defend against that.
Right. You really just need to draw those removal spells, and he has a high density of them. They have to show up to play, though.
And you see just the math on that can get a little cloudy. For Steve, it took him a bit as well. It wasn't just and I think it's that extra counter from having 2 Ravagers.
Right. Sideboarding shouldn't be changing from game to game. There's some argument for Mann to have Thoughtseize on the play more than he wants it on the draw. So he could be taking that one out. The Spell Pierce is still going to be great, though. There's really not much else in his sideboard that plays. You could go for Etch Champion in a matchup like this. It's quite slow. The hands that he wants are the ones that kill very quickly, but Etch Champion is resilient to the removal spells anyway.
All right, so players going to get ready for a 3rd game here. Now, right now we're at an interesting spot here at the Invitational with this really being right after the Marvel bannings, but before our next set, Ixalan, comes out, or Hour of Devastation comes out. Hour of Devastation, of course, coming out next week. That's going to be our pre-release. And over at StarCityGames.com and at stores around the country, we have our pre-release exclusive playmat. This is the Owl of Devastation. You might recognize the art. We replaced Nicol Bolas with a giant bird. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. You can get this at participating stores and at Star City Games. So you can find a location near you at starcitygames.com/pre-release. Make sure to register today, as supplies may be limited.
I really dig that playmat. The thing about a generally non-menacing animal being large and monstrous, it's just neat.
Yeah, you didn't see many just like birds with monstrosity or anything like that.
If you make like a really large wolf, like I get what you're going for.
Yeah.
You got me scared.
It's like a giant sparrow, and you'd be like, ooh, an owl.
Giant owls, I think it's a better creative word.
I showed you yesterday, I believe Magic's biggest owl is the Rime Feather Owl.
I can only think of small owls otherwise. Your Sage Owl.
Your Augury Owl.
There's some other owl that was in one of the Masters editions. It was in Vintage Masters online that like loots when you play it.
It's a one
gotta
time
be from like Visions or Mirage or something.
It's like Time Owl.
That's probably not it.
All right, Matt Voltz will be on the play game 3. Starts off on a copy of Valakut. Steve Mann starts on Signal Pest off Inkmoth Nexus. Remember that Nexus able to help him win game number 2. Our accounts at 4 here. It's going to be Memnite, Ornithopter, Signal Pest, and a land.
So far, nothing that's good against Anger of the Gods. It's difficult for him to produce anything that's good against Ancient Grudge. So again, the pressure's on Matthew to have interactive spells, and it looks like Steve does have second land Arcbound Ravager in hand.
And Matt looking to be set up for a more controlling game plan here. You see he's actually fetching for the basic Forest over a copy of Stomping Grounds. Really concerned with his life total here as he casts Farseek.
If all he's doing is casting a ramp spell, that makes a lot of sense to me, even though basic Forest really is the worst land in the deck.
Yeah, the only worst card is the second basic Forest. That one's... The first one's okay. You can deal with that.
Right.
With basic Forest and Valakut in play, because neither of those are mountains, this actually can cost Matt a turn.
Though, in the sideboard games, it does look like he has an Ancient Grudge in hand. It's all about the disruptive spells.
Ancient Grudge and Anger of the Gods both in his hand. And if that's the kind of game plan he wants to play, then it makes a lot of sense that he's not giving extra damage with his lands.
Yeah, and those are mighty nice holdings.
Unlike, because this build, the Red-Green Breach build, does not play the card Scape Shift, Matt does have to be concerned about how many non-mountain lands he's getting.
Right.
Now we go back to Mann. Spire of Industry at the front of his hand. Also Vault Scourge there. He'll attack for 3 using Battle Cry from Signal Pest. Let's decide what he wants to play around. I do think that fetch of Basic Forest should be a cue for Steve, that Matt is sitting on a reactive hand instead of a proactive hand.
Though, honestly, with the Affinity deck, there's not a ton you can do about it.
Yeah, see, here's Arcbound Ravager, and that actually, if you wanted to play defensively, is your best defensive play.
Right. The correct strategy is to draw it. You don't really have much in the way of options.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it would be like if he had the option between, say, Steel Overseer and Arcbound Ravager here, him going for Ravager is the safer play.
And frequently Overseer is not in the deck post-sideboard when you expect a lot of interaction.
Right. So here's Anger of the Gods from Matt Voltz. It's going to force Mann to sacrifice all these artifacts to his Ravager. These ones would get exiled anyway, so it's easy for him to pick them up. It makes Ravager into a 4/4. That'll be enough to survive, except Voltz has the follow-up Lightning Bolt.
And that's game.
That's, it's real good. So we talked about how Matt Voltz had that 9-card sideboard. Both of those cards are out of the sideboard. And they are mighty nice here.
It's going to be very difficult for Mann to recover from here.
Draws a Thoughtseize.
It's an unfortunate one.
Yeah, little late on this spot.
Needs to assemble an artifact before that Spire can make the black mana for that. Suppose he could activate the Inkmoth Nexus if he was that desperate.
That's how I want to. I don't think that's how he wants to spend his entire turn taking 3 and Thoughtseizing.
Right. I believe there's at least a Vault Scourge in his hand, so he could take 4 and Thoughtseize, or 5.
Right.
But, you know, that's all he's got. You got to play the cards you're dealt. And there is Vault Scourge Thoughtseize. How many good cards could Voltz have left over?
Well, the thing about the Breach deck, here you go. The only card you can take is Ancient Grudge. Okay, I mean, which is good. The hard thing about a Breach deck is because, like, with most Primeval Titan decks, the card Primeval Titan just wins the game on its own. Yeah, it's 6 mana, which is a ton, but it wins. So Thoughtseizing this kind of deck is a really touchy thing to do because you'll very quickly get to a point where they don't have anything good in their hand. They're just waiting to draw a Titan, which he plays 8 copies of. And when he does, you're going to lose.
Yeah, you really want to have it on turn 1. You can't control that you didn't draw it there.
Yeah.
And it would have actually been more significant had he had it earlier.
Right. And that's interesting because you're playing Thoughtseize to take Matt's hate cards, not to take his actual win conditions.
And there are technically more than 4 copies of Primeval Titan in the top deck because of those Summoners packs.
And here's the rest of the hand from Steve. It's a trio now of Vault Scourge.
Steve playing a Mistcut Mountain.
Yeah, Mistcut Ice Age, it looks like.
In a deck of otherwise regular cards.
I don't know why people would play with weird basic lands. I mean,
Now, if he had some miscut Inkmoth Nexus, that would be real nice.
And land from Matt. Search for tomorrow. And this actually is the spot where getting that basic forest is punishing Matt. Yes, he gained 2 life by not fetching for Stomping Ground. However, he would be killing a Vault Scourge right now. He'd be at 12, and Steve would be down a creature. It would be a favorable exchange for him.
Yep. He still has a lot of life to play with, but you're right. It is costing him.
It's one of the hardest parts about playing the Breach deck, the non-Scapeshift build, is your choices on fetching and searching. Like sometimes Far-Seeking for basic Mountain is correct. That is where I spend when I play the deck. The most of my thought is actually just on those decisions.
Sure.
All right, swing for 3 from Mann. Yeah, there are even decisions like, do you fetch for a Stomping Ground or a Cinderglade, which are not clear.
Right.
Remember, there's still 1 Ancient Grudge in Matt's graveyard. He's not pulling the trigger on it just yet. Draws here Cinderglade. That's our first Lightning Bolt. 1 Vault Scourge down. Okay, so there are a total of 12 mountains in Matt's deck. We have 6 in play now. Swing for 2 damage and 1 poison from Steve. These points of life gain are unlikely to matter in the matchup.
Yeah, that's not what this is about right now. We're looking at Voltz looking for a way to pull immeasurably far ahead with Primeval Titan, something like that.
Right.
Or just killing all of Steve's creatures and making it a non-factor.
Fetch land from Matt says go. Now, by not using the fetch land, Matt turns his Valakut activation is now instant speed, so he can use it as a card, as a Lightning Bolt.
And he's kind of at the same life total for regular damage and poison.
Yeah.
Just being able to make a decision based on what happens before combat, that is good.
Here is Arcbound Ravager. Okay.
That was a fortuitous pickup for Steve.
I mean, Affinity's not bad at top decking either. This can happen with the Breach deck. The plus side of it is you have 8 cards that immediately win the game when you draw them. The minus side is that's most of your deck.
So Matthew does still have the back end of that Ancient Grudge in his graveyard.
Yeah, that should keep the Arcbound Ravager from just one-shotting him here. Here's a swing for 2 damage and 1 poison. Ideally, and this is something which I've noticed Matt has done with his list, he's only on 3 copies of Valakut the Molten Pinnacle as opposed to 4. In this type of game, that can actually hurt him.
Yeah, having 2 so we get double both.
Yeah, if you're just going to plan on winning this like fair game with land drops, you want as many Valakuts as possible. Now, there is a cost. Every time you play another Valakut, you're playing a always come into play tapped land that doesn't make green. I mean, I understand why you'd want to cut down on the card.
Right.
Generally, the builds that play Scapeshift always play 3 Valakuts. The Scapeshift list builds, Scapeshift less builds like this, oftentimes are forced into playing the 4th.
Right.
On the attack here, a fetch from Voltz will shoot a Vault Scourge. Steve will sacrifice it to the Ravager in response. That's actually a risky spot for Matt to make that play. So now he can't grudge the Ravager because he'll lose. What he had set up with the fetch land and the grudge before was the option to grudge the Ravager, and then if Steve tried to throw the counters onto anything, use the fetch land on whatever the target was. So until he finds another fetch land, he actually can't shoot the Ravager. You see he drew Valakut as well here. I think that might have been hasty on the fetch land.
Steve does have a lot of non-artifact permanents, though. So that leaving that Ancient Grudge up, he doesn't have to go for killing the Ravager because the Ravager can't become lethal just yet.
Right.
With the 2 Nexus, it could become a 4/4. He could be attacking for 5 regular damage, which is a lot, don't get me wrong. But he does have some value hanging out.
Yeah. We had a correction to the life total. Matt Voltz at 7 now instead of 8. We confirmed that with the judge. Thanks to that Valakut, though, every fetch land from here on out will now be 2 Lightning Bolts from Matt. I still am expecting to use them, though, to kill creatures and not go for life total.
Yeah, from 19.
Well, this is the kind of matchup where you basically kill your opponent's creatures, and you always go at creatures until it is overwhelmingly lethal to go upstairs.
Right. You don't win a matchup like this with chip shots.
Yeah, sometimes like, oh, maybe I'll race my land drops versus your creatures, and the answer is like, no, you never really want to do that. Here is a cranial plating. Now, fortunately for Matt, Steve only has one source of black mana.
Right, he won't be able to switch this around during combat, but he does present two more significant threats here. You have the Voltz Scourge and the Ravager chipping in. That's going to force some action.
Yeah, so we see here the Ravager is a 2/2. The Voltz Scourge counts 3 artifacts, so it's a 4/1. If Steve actually uses Spire Ministry just to activate a Nexus, this, I believe, is a lethal attack.
There is some risk to going for that.
Absolutely.
You open up the possibility for a removal spell in response. That's your only mana to activate Inkmoth Nexus with regard to moving your modular counters from your Ravager over that way.
Right. And you see Steve, yeah. One thing, if you haven't watched Steve Mann before, he is nothing if not patient when it comes to these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
There's still that ancient grudge. And now you see, I think this is going to force action here. Voltz will have to use the grudge.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess is he's got to use it on cranial plating.
Right.
If he uses it, you got to be careful. If he uses it on plating, Ravager will become a 3/3. It could become a 4/4. If he uses, it's not lethal.
Then you do have to start worrying about dying to Galvanic Blast.
Ancient Grudge on cranial plating from Matt Voltz. Sacrifice it to Ravager. Yeah, 4 copies of Galvanic Blast in Steve Mann's list. They might have been the cards that came out for these Thought Seizes.
Right, but not all 4 anyway.
Not all 4.
That is certainly one that makes sense to trim on.
Yeah, Voltz down to 3. Now, though, you might be wondering if Matt has life gain in his deck. The only card that does that is the 2 copies of Courser of Crewfix. Unclear if those are even in the deck anymore.
They're pretty slow going at it, too.
Yeah, they don't block very well here. I would probably not. So Voltz is going to cast Summoner's Pact. So his hand is the best and worst card in his deck. So he's got this Primeval Titan into play. His last card in hand, by the way, is the 2nd basic Forest. The reason I call it the worst card is when I talk to people about this deck, I would say, your worst card's a 2nd basic Forest. It's going to make you lose the game sometimes by itself. And you see Matt's going to get 3 Valakut triggers. He's going to get another Valakut and another Mountain off this Primeval Titan. If that last card in his hand was anything land other than the basic Forest.
He actually goes for 2 mountains here. He has the 2 active Valakuts.
So this is 4 triggers instead of 3.
Right. The timing on this is a little bit awkward. Though Matthew's life is under considerably more duress than his poison threshold.
No, I do like this. If he wants to, I mean, 3 triggers. Actually, they're both lethal. He needs to go 1 at Voltz Scourge and 2 at Arcbound Ravager. No, he needed 4 triggers, actually. I correct myself. He needs to go 2 at both of these creatures. If he makes any other play, he loses.
Right.
So he was forced to get 2 mountains here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's only 1 at Voltz Scourge, then Ravager would save it. And it looks like Matt made a fatal miscalculation here. He went 1 trigger at Voltz Scourge, 2 at Ravager, 1 at Steve, missing the play that Steve could use Ravager to save the Voltz Scourge, and that's going to cost him the match.
Yep. Affinity is a tricky deck to play with and against. You have to be aware of all of those tricks.
You know, and that's so true of these high complexity decks. Like, sure, they're hard to play, but the scary part is to play, I remember that when playing Amulet Bloom. Like, to effectively play against Amulet Bloom, you almost need to be able to pilot the deck, and Affinity's the exact same way.
Right. And Steve Mann takes it down.
Yeah, and it's going to be Affinity improving to 10-2. So Steve is going to be 10-2 entering the standard rounds